When love turns to madness, Nero's marriage to a castrated boy. Nero was the most notorious Roman emperor after Caligula, but he would have been far less notorious if not for his mother, Agrippina the Younger. Agrippina had great influence over him since his childhood until her death in 59 AD. She was also behind his marriage with Poppaea Sabina, who became empress until her death in 62. And then came Pythagoras, a young man whom Nero married just 2 months after Poppaea's demise. We know little about Pythagoras except that he was castrated and a former slave. However, what we do know is that Nero doted on him. The emperor described him as the apple of my eyes. But why did Nero marry a castrated boy? What exactly was their relationship? This and more only in this episode. Hello, and welcome to this channel. When love turns to madness, Nero's marriage to a castrated boy. It all began in Greece in the 1st century AD. In those days, there was a group of people known as the eunuchs of the imperial court. They were castrated men who served as attendants to women in the imperial court, but they were more than servants. Some were educated, could read and write, and even advise their mistress on various matters. They were allowed to marry, but only with other eunuchs or prostitutes. Many emperors had eunuchs as lovers, but it was usually a taboo for them to marry one. Nero was different, though. Pythagoras, an African by origin, was probably brought to Rome as a slave. He earned his freedom thanks to Poppaea Sabina, who purchased him from his master and gave him to Nero as a gift. His name, Pythagoras, might have been a reference to the Greek philosopher Pythagoras of Samos, according to Suetonius, because he liked nothing more than to hold philosophical discussions. Pythagoras became Nero's favorite around 54 AD, when the emperor was 17 years old. Suetonius wrote that Pythagoras lived with Nero in the palace and accompanied him everywhere, sleeping in his chariot while traveling. For example, during their trip to Greece, he shared the same bed with the emperor. Nero was so infatuated with Pythagoras that he even composed a poem in his praise. In it, he compared himself to Ganymede, the Trojan prince who was taken by Jupiter to Olympus to become his cupbearer. And he said that Pythagoras was like the god Jupiter. According to Cassius Dio, Nero wanted to make Pythagoras emperor. He proclaimed Pythagoras Augustus and gave him a purple robe, which was reserved for the emperor. One day, Nero asked Pythagoras to marry him, and later revealed that he wanted to adopt Pythagoras' son and bear the title of father. While such a public declaration was quite audacious, it wasn't something unusual. Ancient Rome knew many same-sex relationships among men of power. However, marrying a castrated man was unheard of. Even though the emperor was head of the cult of the divine couple, which promoted same-sex relations between men, it was difficult to accept the idea of a married gay couple in ancient Rome. Pythagoras was hesitant to marry Nero at first because he didn't want to anger the Senate by becoming emperor's husband. However, the emperor insisted. According to Suetonius, Pythagoras finally accepted and was granted the title of husband. However, later, it was said that Nero even considered castrating Pythagoras before their marriage. Suetonius wrote that he enjoyed humiliating Pythagoras before their union. To make their relationship public, Nero organized a wedding ceremony with great fanfare. In fact, everything was planned meticulously for this event. People were invited from all over the empire, and the celebration lasted for 8 days. After the ceremony, the newlyweds rode in a golden chariot, pulled by 8 horses, and displayed themselves to the public. It must have been a surreal moment for Pythagoras, who went from being a simple freedman to an emperor's husband in the blink of an eye. It's unclear whether Pythagoras actually took the title of husband or not. Some sources state that Nero adopted Burrus, Pythagoras' son from a previous relationship, but there is no evidence to support this. Regardless, Nero was so enamored with Pythagoras that he left his wife in Greece and returned to Rome alone. He built a luxurious villa near his mother's house and moved Pythagoras there. Soon, rumors spread that Pythagoras was living in Nero's villa and having affairs with men and women. Apparently, he wasn't faithful to the emperor. In fact, he was seen kissing a young man named Paris in the baths. A furious Nero ordered Pythagoras to be beaten and thrown into the Tiber River. The emperor continued to torment Pythagoras, and the latter died soon after. Whether Nero ordered his death or not is uncertain, but it seems likely that the emperor orchestrated it. There are several reasons why Nero married Pythagoras. He was in love with him. As we mentioned earlier, he showered Pythagoras with affection and gifts and composed poems in his honor. Nero was obsessed with Ganymede, and Pythagoras reminded him of the Trojan prince. That's why he called himself Ganymede and compared Pythagoras to Jupiter. Another reason was that Nero needed someone to take care of him. His mother died in 59, and Pythagoras replaced Agrippina in some aspects. Like his mother, Pythagoras served as Nero's secretary and accompanied him on travels. Moreover, the emperor wanted to distance himself from his wife, Poppaea. Their relationship was never good, and she spent most of her time away from Nero. So when Pythagoras entered the picture, it was convenient for Nero to get rid of his wife. Also, he needed someone younger than him. Pythagoras was probably not much older than Nero himself, and the emperor loved the idea of having a younger lover. Finally, marrying Pythagoras helped Nero live out his fascination with bisexuality. Although it was rare for Roman men to have male lovers, it wasn't unheard of. By marrying Pythagoras, Nero not only expressed his desire, but also flaunted it in public. It sent a message to Rome that he wasn't ashamed of his preference. It was a bold statement, considering the conservative nature of Roman society. However, Nero's advisors didn't approve of the marriage. They thought it would upset the Senate and the whole of Rome. Nero had already married a woman and couldn't divorce her under Roman law. The solution was simple, though. Poppaea was pregnant at the time, and Nero sent her to Greece to give birth. Once Poppaea gave birth to a daughter, Nero sent her back to Rome and set up a lavish brothel for her, where she spent most of her time. Poppaea eventually died in 65 AD, but it was said that Nero killed her when he learned that she had an affair with his friend, Sporus. This further strained Nero's relationship with the Senate. They condemned his marriage to Pythagoras and refused to accept the latter as Nero's consort. The emperor was undeterred, though. He wanted to marry Pythagoras despite the opposition and did so without hesitation. Now let's talk about the nature of their relationship. It's safe to say that Nero loved Pythagoras, but how the two met is unknown. What we do know is that Nero kept Pythagoras close and always wanted him by his side. He trusted Pythagoras and made him his secretary, which meant that he entrusted him with important documents and messages. Moreover, he brought Pythagoras with him on trips, even to Greece, where Nero intended to marry Pythagoras. The emperor was so fond of Pythagoras that he described him as the apple of my eyes. He even said that Pythagoras was more important to him than the whole world. There is no doubt that Pythagoras was one of the most influential people in Nero's life, and he played a significant role in the emperor's personal and political decisions. After Pythagoras' death, Nero fell into a deep depression. He was inconsolable and didn't know how to cope with the loss. The emperor was devastated and spent most of his time alone, away from the public eye. He refused to attend parties and events, and when he did, he was uncharacteristically quiet and withdrawn. Nero was so heartbroken that he started wearing black clothes, which was a sign of mourning in Roman culture. He also grew a beard and stopped shaving, which made him look older and more haggard. In addition, Nero became reclusive and didn't want to see anyone. He spent most of his days in bed, eating and drinking, and he gained a lot of weight. He also started having nightmares and couldn't sleep well. Overall, Nero was a changed person after Pythagoras' death, and it seemed like he couldn't go on without him. He became depressed, withdrawn, and bitter. It was clear that Nero loved Pythagoras very much, and his death had taken a toll on the emperor's mental and physical health. In conclusion, Nero's marriage to Pythagoras was a unique and controversial event in Roman history. While same-sex relationships between men were not unheard of in ancient Rome, marrying a castrated man was a taboo. Nevertheless, Nero openly declared his love for Pythagoras and defied societal norms by marrying him. The relationship between the two men was passionate and intense, and Pythagoras held a significant place in Nero's heart. Despite facing opposition from the Senate and the public, Nero remained steadfast in his decision to marry Pythagoras and lived openly with him in a lavish villa. Unfortunately, the relationship ended tragically with Pythagoras' untimely death, which devastated Nero and plunged him into a deep depression. The death of Pythagoras serves as a reminder of the fleeting nature of love and the devastating impact it can have on even the most powerful of rulers. If you like our videos, please leave a thumbs up. If you haven't already, subscribe now. See you next time.